Okay, guys, let's do the third part of our score test.
For many people, language acquisition starts at around about 12 months when kids say their first word, but don't forget the first year. That first year of life is very important as well, and indeed before you're born. Remember, there are a couple of months before you're born when you're actually able to perceive in the womb something of the language that's around you. So language acquisition starts earlier than most people think. And it also ends later than most people think. When does child language acquisition stop? Well, in a sense, we're all children. We stay being children all our lives. There's no obvious end point. For learning sounds, of course, there is, and for learning grammar, there is, but vocabulary, that goes on for the rest of our lives. A million or more words in English, and most of us only have a vocabulary of 50, 60, 70,000 words or whatever it is. And so there's always something more to learn. So remember that the two ends of child language acquisition are wider apart than some people think. And that means there's more scope for studying it than most people think.
I have noted down like the points. Let's write. Language acquisition. I'm not sure about acquisition spelling though. The speaker provided brief information about language acquisition. First of all, he talked importance of first year of a child. Us. That was the that is the major language learning time. Then he mentioned that language learning process starts even before we are born. Later, he suggested that learning new languages, vocabulary and pronunciation never stops. is there is no stop to learning. Finally, he concluded that there is always more scope for studying than most people think. To 70 words. How many words? 69 words. Okay. The speaker provided brief information about language acquisition. First of all, he talked about the importance of first year of a child as it is the First of all, he talked about the importance of first year of a child as it is the major language learning time. Then he mentioned that language learning process starts even before we are born. Later, he suggested that learning new languages, vocabulary, and pronunciation never stops. Finally, he concluded that there is always more scope for studying than more people think. There is always more scope for studying than most people think. Next. What are the
In his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Other Clinical Tales, neurologist Oliver Sacks relates the tale of a medical student who one day woke up and found that his sense of smell was so acute that, like a dog, he could walk around identifying people, places, and things by his sense of smell. And what a wondrous experience it was. Like a visit to another world, he said. Normally, we humans don't have a sense of smell as acute as many other animals. We tend to rely more on what we see or hear to tell us about the world. Still, our sense of smell is powerful. Most of us can detect 10,000 different odors, from cigar smoke to a chlorinated swimming pool, from curry to a city sewer. And think about how a particular odor can instantly conjure up past memories. Maybe it's fresh-cut grass that makes you think of childhood summers, or baking bread that reminds you of a special holiday.
What are the odors associated with past events that are mentioned in the audio? Baking bread, fresh cut grass, color, swimming pool. Okay. Next. I'm going to write down them in my book.
Experimental psychological research is conducted in a lab under controlled conditions. It attempts to rely solely on an application of research methods to understand behavior and mental processes. As an example of a psychological experiment, you might want to investigate people's perception of different tones. Specifically, you could ask the following question. Is it easier for people to discriminate one pair of tones from another depending on their frequency? To answer this, you would want to disprove the hypothesis that all tones are equally easy to discriminate.
perception, depending on their frequency.
Graham Greene may have inadvertently supplied one of the key phrases of the past 50 years in the title of his novel, A Burnt-Out Case. The image of a dead fire perfectly fit the psychological aftermath of long hours, dashed hopes, and depression. And while burnout is not a medical diagnosis, it describes a condition we all recognize, except perhaps in ourselves.
Oh, that was hard. Except, I heard it like except, I'm not sure. First one is dead. I am dead. For physiological aftermath. Maybe aftermath, right? Aftermath. I don't know. Is there any like aftermath? Depression. Okay.
Well, the banana is the first cultivated fruit. It's one of the food items that literally brought people out of the jungle, out of their hunter-gatherer lifestyles, and was there at the dawn of agriculture, which is what helped force human beings into communities. It's really one of the things that helped invent human culture. It's about 7,000 years of history. And the banana, from its center of origin, which is believed to be Papua New Guinea, it spread out with people who traveled in boats across the Pacific into the mainland of Asia and all the way south to Australia, across Indonesia, Micronesia, and eventually they moved as far as Africa and even possibly to Ecuador, all in this time and all on paddled boats and wind-driven boats.
Community origin. Community origin.
In the United States, the poet Walt Whitman published a work called Democratic Vistas. This was in 1871, and I quote from that work. He's talking here about the development of a program of culture drawn out, not for a single class alone, or for the parlors or lecture rooms, but with an eye to the practical life and to the West, the working man, the facts and forms and jack planes and engines, of the broad range of the woman also, of the middle class and working strata, and with reference to the perfect equal quality of women and of a grand and powerful motherhood. So these ideas of the individual, the ordinary individual, as someone who has a right and a responsibility to an education, had begun clearly to emerge in the United States.
I am randomly selecting something. This is a time killer.
So starting with a question why industrial cities matter. Well, in 1995 and 6, funded by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, I did a study with a fellow researcher called The Slow Death of Great Cities. And that was because urban abandonment in America was happening on such a scale and causing such terror over here that when cities like Manchester and Newcastle started to show signs of empty properties emerging in their city streets, in their inner city streets, there was kind of quite serious panic. So that was my first exposure to what happens when cities start losing population in a significant way.
Which is identified as holding back the implementation of Project ACE.
And we identified 15 priority projects which are supposed to be urgent and immediate needs of adaptation. And these projects, the first one is slightly being implemented, but there is so much bureaucracy behind the funding of that project that it still hasn't been implemented properly. So if these were urgent and immediate needs, then how come it's not being implemented on an urgent and immediate basis? Because the fund is not there. Even if the fund is there, some bureaucratic things are holding it behind. There are some of the funds, they say, like, you have to have certain infrastructures in place and certain things have to be in place for us to fund this additional climate change. But the funds are, what everyone says in these climate change conferences, are not enough. They're just not enough.
When the speaker refers to the person who visited his school as being visionary, he is being...
When I was 14 years old, a visionary visited my school. The man was a pioneer in new technologies, and he had come to announce how the world I was growing up in was on the verge of radical change. He brandished a VHS cassette and announced that television was going to be transformed forever. Using the power of VHS, everyone would make their own TV programs. Instead of accepting the bland output of comedy and drama from the existing networks, we would simply take control ourselves and become producers as well as consumers. TV stations were going to close, corporations would fold, and a new wave of creativity was about to be unleashed. To me, at that age, it seemed like impeccable logic, and the scenario he described seemed inevitable. Over the following years, it became clear that what he had predicted was certainly not coming true, and I began to think of him as an idiot.
Sarcastic.
The neuroendocrine system is under particular onslaught in our modern life. Not only does it serve as the conduit for our emotional life, but it is also under threat from our external environment. The amount of chemicals acting as so-called endocrine disruptors is going up by the day. These chemicals, which range from pesticides and herbicides to ingredients of plastics, which look chemically like some of the hormones in our bodies, can then bind to the receptor and cause a stimulation of the receptor, or block it so that the appropriate hormone cannot
do its work.
Logistics is really orchestrating what we now call globalization. Companies have outsourced and offshored many of their operations. In fact, some of them, almost their entire operations. And what's come to be called supply chain management, which is the strategic end of this business, is what knits it all together. It is what makes sure that things turn up where they should be, when they should be. And by squeezing costs out of the system, you don't carry so much stock, you don't need to have the warehouses of old, and you can move things faster and...
River systems can be classified by their basic shapes. Young streams are generally straight, are in narrow, steep-sided valleys, and are often fast-flowing in a channel with many big rocks. Young streams have high gradients, meaning the elevation of the stream changes quickly with distance. Old rivers are in broad, flat valleys. They flow slowly and carry sand and mud. Old streams, like the lower part of the Mississippi River, have very low gradients. That is, the elevation changes very little over long distances.
Channel, canal.
Over half of patients had what we called the no symptoms, no asthma health belief. They thought about and managed their asthma as an acute episodic illness, the way someone would treat a cold or a flu. They felt when they had their wheezing or shortness of breath, that's when they had their asthma, and it made perfect sense for them to use their quick relief medicines and their chronic controller medicines then. But once they started feeling better, they felt there was no reason for using those medicines because they felt okay.
Couldn't find much. Get ready with your paper and pen.
It is absolutely vital that you acknowledge all your sources.
It is absolutely vital that you acknowledge all your sources.
In any written assignment, a detailed literature review is very important.
Important detailed literature written assignments. In any written assignments, detailed in capital. In any written assignments, a detailed literature is very important.
Control systems in manufacturing provide a high level of accuracy.
Provide a high level of accuracy. Control systems in manufacturing. Spelling. Control systems in manufacturing provide a high level of accuracy. The test is now complete. You report already, so the test finished area. Okay, so once the results are available, I will add that as well. Bye guys.